Welcome back. This is the beginning of a brand new series. I'm gonna finally get back to some daily or semi-daily prep releases on the new topic about encryption. But first, I have some updates in general, like life updates. So I am currently, for the first time, in a new apartment in Ecuador. Finally, I say finally because I actually was supposed to come to Ecuador a few weeks ago, but a number of things have delayed that. Most importantly, there are currently protests in the town that we were supposed to be in, the town of Cotacachi in Imbabura province up in the north. And those protests have like blocked the roads. So they've literally dragged like tree trunks to almost all of the main roads. So it's kind of impossible to get there. And even if we did, like all of the businesses are closed. So it might not be the best time to actually go to Cotacachi. So as a result, we are here in Quito for 4 months. I can show you. It's like an amazing city. It's so beautiful. Um, we have all of this like cool foliage around. So this is snake grass. These are jacarandi trees, and that over there is eucalyptus, which is an invasive species in Ecuador, but is super common in Quito. So I'm super excited to be here. I'm here with my cat, who is currently looking at herself by the door. Hello, Evie. Do you want to say hi? Hello. Oh, hi. She was a trooper during the flight. But yeah, finally in Ecuador, which means that my video schedule is going to become a whole lot more consistent. So to start with, we have a new topic for November and December. I'm a little bit late getting to it because it was voted on, back in October 1st and it's now October 21st. But here's my like preliminary thoughts on the topic, not having done very much research, which will come in the next few days. So the topic is resolved. The United States federal government should require technology companies to provide lawful access to encrypted communications. So let's go through each of these terms one by one. I think that's a useful thing to do at the beginning. So, United States federal government, probably this is going to be Congress. That seems to be the normal means for all of these kinds of things. And I think similar, like there are bills that are being debated in Congress or have been debated in Congress that basically do the resolution. So that's probably the most likely channel through the federal government that actually does this. I guess technically it could be an executive order through the executive branch, through the president. I don't think this is really likely, but it could happen. And it could also be the Supreme Court in some roundabout way. Like maybe if there's a case that's brought against the federal government for taking information that is encrypted by a technology company, then maybe like the Supreme Court could decide on that case, which would then create the requirement. Although I think that's a little bit sketchy as an interpretation of the topic. So probably this is just going to be a congressional bill, although it might be upheld by the courts later on if it does get challenged. For technology companies, this one's a little bit weird. So this one has what we call a bare plural, meaning like there's no adjective that modifies technology companies, as in we don't really know like if it's all technologies or some technology companies, or what. So I think there's three basic ways that we can interpret this in the resolution. We could either use the existential interpretation, which is like technology companies means like there are technology companies which will be regulated in this way, right? Meaning as long as there are any, then technically the AF has happened, right? You could imagine that if the most probable implementation is like we just take one specific sector of technology companies, even if that's not like the majority of technology companies, it's just some technology companies, it might still, under an existential interpretation, be considered topical. The interpretation I think is better is the general interpretation, which is just like when we talk about things like this, like the government should, I don't know, like prosecute like crimes. We're probably talking not just about like crimes in specific, right? Like one or two. We're probably talking about like crimes in general. Like in general, the federal government should do this. Meaning we would be talking about like the vast majority that aren't edge cases of technology companies. The final reading is we could have an absolute reading. I don't really think there's linguistic grounds for reading this as an absolute, but I guess there's some way that you could try to stretch the resolution to say that it requires all technology companies to provide lawful access. Next is also like it's very, I think, vague what a technology company is. So, I mean, intuitively, it's probably a company that provides a product or service that has some technological component. So there are some obvious examples that definitely are technology companies, things like Microsoft, Apple, etc. But there are a lot of weird like fringe examples where like I'm not sure if this is a technology company. So for example, like there are a lot of companies that provide a technology for sure. Like if we're talking about companies that do research and development or something, like pharma companies, they definitely provide a technology. Or like med tech companies, right? Like it's in the name. Or any kinds of like hardware companies, like what about SpaceX? Is that like a technology company? They're making a technology. But I don't know. Like you can stretch the definition of technology really far to include like basically any tool. But I think we're probably talking mostly about technology companies that are actually creating a platform for communications. Because the rest of the resolution talks about encrypted communications. I think if the resolution was about encrypted communications between like employees of the company, it would apply to every company ever. So I'm not sure. I think the only reason why it would make sense to include the modifier of technology company in here in this context is if we're talking about the kinds of companies that are creating the like communications platforms. So like social media companies or like Apple, Google, etc. that have like platforms for users to communicate and share information and share data. This doesn't necessarily just have to be like social media. It could also be like direct communications between people, like Gmail, I guess, from Google. But you might be able to stretch it to say it's like communications between employees of companies as well. But I don't know. I think that's definitely a big question that we should be looking into. What is lawful access? Lawful access is basically just making sure that we're not saying that law enforcement agencies get like a free pass to take whatever information they want from these encrypted communications. They only are able to do it if it is lawful for them to do so, meaning they have to have a warrant or a court order. All of these are probably up for interpretation and debated by the courts, the federal courts, I guess, in this case, because we're talking about the federal government. Uh, Although that's an interesting question too, right? The federal government is the actor, but provide lawful access to encrypted communications. I guess the federal government could also require technology companies to provide like local law enforcement agencies lawful access. So that might be another interesting interpretation of the resolution I hadn't thought about. So maybe we're talking about agencies that are not just federal, in which case the lawfulness of the access would also be up to the local courts, like state courts, which might be, a bit more partisan or skew in different directions. Finally, what are encrypted communications? So encryption uses a key to translate data into complex codes. The idea is like if I email someone, then the text of the email gets put into this, like effectively this machine. A key is used to scramble it all up into like a bunch of nonsense. And then that nonsense gets to the other device of the person I emailed, for example. And then there's another key that unscrambles it back out into the original text of the email. At least that's my understanding of encryption from like the brief research that I've done on it. I'm sure there's lots of different kinds of encryption. Already I found that there's like different kinds of keys. So they have like different amounts of different possibilities you need to try. So like a 64-bit key, for example, means that you have to try 2 to the 64, which is like an incredible number of combinations to unlock the key, basically. And then there are even bigger keys, like 256 key, and even more that are being researched day to day. There's also like end-to-end encryption, which is a whole other thing. So encryption is a changing technology that is being used in a lot of different ways that we definitely need to research further. The other question I have here is like, what is communication? If you interpret it very literally as like communication between people, then this might narrow the resolution a little bit. It's like that includes things like text messages and emails and things like that. But you also might consider like the communication between devices, right? Which would increase it to like any kind of information that is sent from one device to another, including things that might not be thought of as traditional communication, like maybe like timestamps, or like other things that are attached to communications. That's still information that's transferred, but communicated from one device to another, which is interesting. So I think that's probably honestly a better interpretation of what this will be used for. So some background questions that I want to research over the next couple days. What is encryption used for? I think that will delineate a lot of the ground that exists on the topic. What are the different types of encryption? How does that work? What companies use the different types and why? What are the current regulations around encryption? I know that like a lot of companies encrypt in order to follow regulations that tell them they have to, and like the privacy laws around this. What about the different regulations around lawful access to data? Like that probably will root the topic in a very important way. So that will provide important context. Also, like, what is the counterfactual, right? Like, how do agencies get access to encrypted communication right now, or do they at all? I think they do. Like, I'm pretty sure that some tech companies willingly give up information that is encrypted to different agencies, but I'm not 100% sure on that. So you'd have to fact check me, and I'll fact check me in the future videos as well. What kind of proposals are on the table for something similar to the resolution? I've read like some bills already that propose something that's giving lawful access to encrypted communications. So as many of those as we can read as possible would be great because that's probably the closest thing we have to an approximation of like most probable implementation. And then also like what other tools do the agencies currently use to find this information? If they would be using the encrypted information to get something, how would they try to get that thing without the use of encrypted communication? Because that will create the uniqueness and the comparative that exists in the debate. So for the core ground, I think it's relatively obvious and relatively intuitive from like the very brief research that I've done and the thinking that I've done this. The core pro ground seems to be very straightforward. It's just we get new information to stop new criminals from doing criminal things. And then you just fill in the blank on which criminal you're talking about. The key there is having uniqueness, right? Like, why are we not already able to get information about these criminals? Why is it only by getting access to encrypted information? And do we even need to require technology companies to give us this, or can we like offer them a reward to give us this? I don't know. Like, I don't know what the counterfactual is here, but that poses some interesting uniqueness questions. For the con, I think there's a few different main routes. One that's like going to be all over the internet is like privacy, right? I think that in PF specifically, people like to stay away from impacts like privacy because they feel too squishy. They feel too like philosophical and abstract. Like how are you going to outweigh extinction, right? But I think this is interesting ground if someone wants to take a crack at it. Maybe there's like interesting framing you can use. I think more likely the con will go for one of these other two paths, which is you make encryption more vulnerable, right? Like you build, like in order to have a technology company give encrypted data to the law enforcement agencies, they have to have some system that creates like a backdoor or a key, for example, that they just have on hand that allows them to decrypt this kind of communication very easily to give it to the agency. If that's true, then maybe this provides a shortcut for like cybercrime. Like if some other hackers want to like get access to this decrypted information, then maybe they can have an easier time if the technology company already has set it up to be easy to decrypt for themselves. But I don't know. That could create more cyber vulnerabilities, and maybe there's a perception argument is there as well, where like even if this doesn't happen, people think it might happen, and that hurts like the economy in some way. And then the final line that I think is going to be very common is just like maybe it's bad for the agencies to have this information, not just because of privacy, but because maybe they will use it for nefarious acts or they will use it to do things that hurt democracy or something like that. Some strategic considerations, then. I think the most important things for the pro to think about are how they can turn cyber vulnerability. So, for example, maybe the pro is able to say, like, we stop hackers by getting more information on hackers that then goes to like the FBI. So then we stop more cybercrime before it even takes place. And then if they have any defense on like the backdoors link, then that probably creates a net turn on cyber vulnerability. There's probably also other things that you can do there. But also, how can we turn the agencies use this for bad stuff? Like, obviously, you will have an agencies use this for good, but maybe there's other ways to say, like, if they didn't do this, then they would find information all the same in even more like even worse way where like A, it's less useful information for the good stuff, but like B, like I don't know, maybe they also do more bad stuff somehow. Or maybe there's an argument that's like there's more of a spotlight on agencies if we pass this bill and it's very public, and there's more reform efforts. Or maybe the reform efforts are packaged into the bill. Or maybe we're able to use this to do like government oversight. Like maybe we're able to like get technology companies to give us like the communications between different politicians so we can stop weird corruption from happening. I don't know. There's probably a lot of different ways that the pro can try to turn like government corruption or authoritarianism, democracy stuff in different ways. For the con, I think the number one consideration is turning agency information. Like maybe there's a way to get better information for agencies by not affirming. Like maybe there's a counterfactual or something happening in the status quo that would trade off in some way with the affirmative that already satisfies the need for information. And I think that this is difficult to balance if you're also going for like agencies will use the information nefariously. But maybe there's like a false positives argument or something that says like both can be true at the same time. Like if there's false positives, I don't know, they do like double the ICE raids, and then they also arrest people who are not undocumented immigrants in the process. So they have like less accurate information, but they use it like more nefariously as well in some way. And then on both sides, I think that we should be thinking about the counterfactual as much as possible. So, what would the agencies do to collect this information instead? Like maybe this avoids some kind of better or some kind of worse information gathering tactic on the other side. Some more niche areas of the topic that I think are worth exploring. I think there are a lot of interesting global links to like increase your scope. There's some international relations stuff probably on both sides about how this affects either the rest of the world's use of surveillance from the government or the rest of the world's relations with the US on surveillance things. The US has a lot of surveillance partnerships with like Five Eyes and different other groups that do surveillance and share surveillance. So, how do those get affected by this kind of policy? Do other countries like this? Do they not like this? How does that manifest in changes in relationships? And manifest in like material changes like trade or security cooperation. Who knows? There's definitely some stuff about the war on terror and war on drugs. This kind of goes back to the same collection of like arguments about how agencies will get new information they didn't have earlier. So the pro would say that they use that for good, right? They like use that to more effectively counter terror or more effectively counter drug cartels in ways that are safer and better, like create less civilian casualties. On the con, you'll say, no, this just like expands the war on terror and expands the war on drugs in bad ways, and maybe even makes them less effective in some way. There's also like some hegemony arguments. So I read a book for an international relations class when I was in college that was about how the US has an interesting like a lot of different things flow through the US system, both in terms of like the example that it gave was the SWIFT system for like international banking, but they also applied this to like the internet. Like literally a bunch of hubs of the internet flow through the US and therefore exist within US legal jurisdiction. And I think that the same thing probably applies to a lot of these technology companies. So then you create these weird effects like the panopticon effect, where the US effectively becomes able to like spy on the goings on politically of other countries. Like maybe the US is able to spy on Iran, for instance, because it is able to like get lawful access somehow. I mean, I'm sure they'll spin it in some way, to get access to like the communications of Iranian officials over some kind of media platform, for example. As long as that is attached in some way to a technology company that has a hub in the US, then it has jurisdiction to do that, and it can kind of like subpoena those or like get lawful access to those communications to uphold its hegemony internationally. So that is an interesting thing that I think we should consider. There's definitely some investor perceptions arguments that might tie to the economy. There's some like backlash and like weird politics arguments, like how does this affect voting? How does this affect lobbying, etc. Intellectual property might be an interesting argument on either side, like protecting intellectual property, probably more of a con argument. But who knows? There might be a pro link as well. And that might have links into things like innovation and technology. There are some court arguments, probably. Like, for one, this has to be upheld in order for durable fiat to be satisfied, meaning that this might create unintended consequences for precedent on other court cases later on. So, this, for example, might unintentionally actually have the effect of expanding the government, like, legal ability to do surveillance in ways that affect future court cases. Also, there's probably going to be court clog and like the reverse, like unclog arguments on either side. It's like the con court clog argument would be intuitive, right? Like a bunch of companies or people sue the government for doing this, and then that goes through the courts. clogging them up and preventing other court cases from being heard. The unclog argument would be like maybe this prevents more crime or like more shenanigans, or maybe this like creates more evidence that can be used in court cases. Whatever the case, this might reduce the amount of court cases that are actually heard in other areas or make the courts more efficient in some way. And then finally, I think that there's probably going to be a boatload of arguments about specific kinds of technology, especially the ones that debaters and PF like to use to get access to big extinction or even S-risk impacts like AI, quantum computing, etc. Um, my concerns about the topicality of like what counts as a technology company apply probably. But I'm sure that people will just sort of ignore that. So I bet you're going to see a bunch of like weird like space tech and weapons tech, like nuclear modernization companies. I don't know. You're probably going to like have all of that as some kind of link or another. I think the important thing to remember there is that there are only so many ways that a company can be affected by the resolution. So even if you have different contentions about different kinds of companies, they probably have the same basic link, meaning that your responses won't have to change very much depending on what company they use. Okay, so my plan for like tomorrow and the next day, I want to write the stock cases. So for the pro, I'll probably just write the enforcement argument, just like we collect more information that is useful for doing agency things that are good. The uniqueness I'll have to spend some time on. We can't access these encrypted communications right now, so there's some haven for criminals communicating about this. Also, I think it would be useful to say like maybe we're trying in worse ways right now that are like both less effective and more damaging in ways that the con might say this is damaging later. So I can try to use that as like a preemptive link turn on some of the con arguments, especially about like agencies using this for bad or the inherent harms of surveillance. And then I'll have like a bunch of different ways that we solve this, a bunch of links, probably some spikes that are about like deterrence, so I don't have to win every single link. And then like I'll just fill in whichever of these looks the best. So bunch of different examples of crime. Some of these, like cybercrime and government oversight, will be useful as turns to some of the offense I expect to be stock on the con. And then we'll just fill in whatever else I think has big impacts that could be useful. For the con, I'll probably try to write privacy with some kind of like philosophical framing as like a principle. If that doesn't seem to work out, then I'll probably just tack on some weird stuff, use privacy as like the tag to like the vessel for some pragmatic arguments underneath it, like government legitimacy impacts or like the backlash stuff or court clog. I'll write the cyber vulnerability. I think that's going to be very stock, so very important to write. And then finally, the agencies will use this for bad. Maybe there'll be like more ICE raids or suppressing protests and dissent and stuff, which hurts democracy. So that's my plan. If anyone has any questions about anything, just feel free to comment on this YouTube video, and that will also like influence the direction of my prep as well. So if you're curious about how any arguments interact or what I think about any arguments, I'm happy to answer those questions like along the way in future videos. Okay, so to close out the video, since I'm in Ecuador, I've been studying like the plants and stuff. I wanted to try playing this GeoGuessr map, which is AI generated, as in the locations are AI picked from Ecuador. The like disclaimer I'll give is I have not really played very much GeoGuessr in Ecuador before, so this will be like a baseline, and then hopefully in like the future days I'll like learn a little bit and improve based on that learning. So right off the bat, we have this terrible quality camera, which I think is pretty common around like all of Ecuador. There's some mountains in the distance. So thinking closer to this like central strip of Ecuador, it's pretty hilly. It's pretty green. These trees with the white bark almost remind me a little bit of the Amazon, but I think that's too dangerous. So I don't think I'm going to click on the Amazonian side. This grass is interesting. But yeah, I mean, there's a palm tree. So maybe we're considering like slightly closer to the coast. Um, so there's these big mountains. I kind of don't feel like it's as big as this part of the Andes. We have this like big, um, like almost valley in the middle, but then there's more mountains over here. I feel like we're on the left stretch of mountains because they're a little bit smaller and a little bit greener. So I might think like up here, but I don't know. Yeah, one less pass. This looks fine. Although I really do think it could be especially with this house with like the stilts on it. This could just be like over here, like near Tena or something, which by the way, we almost were living in. But I'm gonna try the E20 here for now. And oh, it is Amazonian side. So I actually had good instincts there, but didn't go for it. But it's all the way south. Okay, that's interesting. Good to remember for next time. Okay, next location. This is very different. Um, okay, interesting. I'm getting more of a south vibe. I don't really know why. I mean, this is drier, clearly, which I feel like I would associate more with the south. These palm trees are really interesting. I feel like this is a different species of palm. Um, I don't know what it's called, but I'll look into that. And we have like a banana plant here. Um, nothing else to this is like a political ad, I think. Nothing else too distinctive giving anything away. So, ooh, this is a tough one, but I'm gonna try down here by like Cuenca. And it is pretty south, even further south. Okay, so a decent vibe on the region there. Next, number three, we have a railroad. Interesting. It looks fairly flat for Ecuadorian standards. We have this little family on the bike. What is this over here? What are these white things? I wonder. Oh, this is sugar cane. Oh, that's interesting. So with these palms, with the sugar cane, with the flatness, I feel like we have to be more in this kind of coastal region over here, perhaps. So I'm gonna plop it down in here. And it was near Guayaquil. So even further like down by the this little coast, this bay. I don't know what it's called. Um, but these rivers here. Okay. Fourth, penultimate location. Let's see here. Back to the bad quality camera. Um, this one is also looking a little bit Amazonian, to be honest. We've got like that tall grass from before as well. So, and these interesting palms. So maybe I'll send Amazon this time. And of course, it could be like Esmeraldas. I think that area looks similar, but let's try to go over by like Loreto. Okay, it was El Carmen. Okay, so yeah, this area on the co like the northern coast often looks almost Amazonian, but I'm sure within a couple days I'll be able to tell the difference. Okay, interesting. This is like really high up. You can see all of these are like eucalyptus trees. So this definitely looks like it's like in the Andes. Um, it's not like Quito. We don't have a huge city. Although this is like a fairly large city. I wonder if it could be like Ambato or something. Or like Riobamba. I don't know. Let's try it. And it actually was Quito. Wow. Okay, so it was this smaller area of Quito. So I am living like in the, bigger area of Quito over here. So I didn't recognize that. But that makes sense. I mean, it was a pretty big city that we saw down there. So okay, not a great start, but we have a baseline for improvement. So I'm sure I can look back at this in like a couple weeks and be like, wow, I've gotten so much better at guessing in Ecuador. So thanks for watching, everyone. I'll be back hopefully tomorrow with some more updates on prep and stuff, and I'll see you guys later.